Hi there, in this video we're going to have a look at the topic of essay planning, and I'm going to introduce you to one of the pitfalls that can occur when you're thinking about planning your essays. I'm also going to tell you how to avoid that pitfall and an approach that you can use to make sure that you plan your essays in a way that will get you the best marks possible for your efforts. I've got a question for you. What is the purpose of an essay? Now, I know that sounds like a trick question, but I promise it's not. Just give it a think for a few seconds. What are you trying to achieve when you write an essay? Now, the research indicates that tutors and students are often rather different in what they think constitutes an essay. Students are much more about thinking of essays in terms of the reproduction of knowledge, i.e. showing off how much they know about a topic, whereas tutors think of essays much more as a vehicle for showing how you can use information or how you can construct arguments. Now, the way you think about the purpose of an essay is going to determine the way you go about planning that essay. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So if you view the purpose of an essay as to reproduce knowledge, then you're probably going to think about the process of planning as just making a list of topics you need to cover that are relevant to that essay title. And this may sound like a perfectly sensible thing to do, but when it comes to essays, it's really only half the battle. It's one thing knowing what topics you want to cover, but for an essay you need to know how you're going to move between those different topics, how you're going to develop an academic discourse around those topics, and you have to be able to plan for that. If we use the satellite navigation analogy, let's say that you've got a point of origin, let's say your house, and a place you want to be, let's say it's a retail park 20 or 30 miles away from your house. Now, if you were to use a satellite navigation to do this journey, but the satellite navigation system only gave you a list of towns or places of interest that you would pass through on your way from your home to the retail park, that wouldn't be much good to you in navigating that route, would it? Because what you're really interested in is not just so much which places of interest or towns you will go through on your journey, but how you're going to link up those different places to form a route that you can actually follow. And it's the same when you're planning an essay. It's not enough to know about which topics you want to cover. What you also need to know about is how you're going to move between those topics, how you're going to create an argument using those topics, how you're going to use the information that is kind of embedded in those topics to respond to the particular essay title that you've been set. And you have to plan for that every bit as much as you're planning for the contents of your essay. In planning your essay, what I suggest you do is break down your essay into a series of main sections. And then for each of those sections, you need to think about three things. The first thing is, what is the objective of that section? What is its purpose? The second thing is, what is the narrative that you're trying to use or develop in producing that particular section of your essay? And what is the evidence that you might need to use in conjunction with that narrative to support the narrative? The third thing is, what is the overall argument that you're trying to make? And how are you going to link this section of your essay to the following section? Now, what I'm going to do is put an example up on the screen and work with it with you so you can see how this approach works in practice. So let's plan a section of writing using the approach that I've just advocated. Now, when you're planning a section of writing, the first thing you need to be clear on is the objective that that particular section of writing is going to serve. Because if you're not clear on this, what will tend to happen is you'll start to write aimlessly. And aimless writing tends to not produce any kind of coherent narrative, and it also tends to go off topic very quickly. So for every section you're going to plan, the first thing you think of is, what is the purpose of this particular section? What am I trying to achieve? And as you can see here, what I'm trying to achieve with this particular section in the example we're working through is to give you some really important advice on planning your written composition. But of course, it's not enough to just have an objective when you're planning a section of writing. What you also need to give some thought to is the narrative, or if you like, the story that you're trying to establish in order to achieve that objective. And at this point, it's also a good idea to consider what evidence you might need or information you might want to convey to furnish your narrative, or perhaps to back up some of the points or arguments that you're making. Now, the critical thing about a narrative is you can think of it as like a sequence of events or a sequence of waypoints that you need to go through in order to tell a story effectively. And you can see here that's what I've done using not a huge amount of words. I've just mapped out the argument that I was making earlier in this video, that students and tutors can often differ in their expectations of written work. Students tend to prioritise contents, lecturers tend to prioritise the use of the contents to formulate an argument. And I'm also arguing that students that tend to think of essays as just kind of content reproduction tend to go about the process of planning suboptimally, in they just think about, look, what content do I need to squeeze in here, rather than what do I do with that content. And you can see in this little section as well, I've also sort of started to think about what sources I might want to use to substantiate the kind of narrative that I'm trying to establish. So having established an objective and a narrative for the section of writing that you're working on, the next thing you want to do is think about how you can kind of bring that section to a close by making an argument, and then signposting to the reader how you're going to move from the current section to the next section of your essay. And this is really important because what you want to do is bring each section to a natural close and then establish some continuity between the section you're working on and the section that's coming next, because this is what gives your essay a kind of cohesive narrative and ensures that it has continuity. Again, what you want to avoid is producing an essay that just seems nothing more than a series of disparate paragraphs that have just been kind of thrown on the page at the reader. So you can see what I've done here is I've followed up from the narrative and kind of formulated it into an argument that students should really view their plans not just as an inventory of content, but also as a plan for how they're going to use that content to develop an academic discourse. And that's kind of, if you like, the closing argument, the way I'm bringing that section together. And then I go on to kind of establish a signpost or a link to the next section, in this case by saying that, of course, one of the benefits of making sure that you plan your work well is you improve the clarity of your composition. Which brings us on nicely to the next topic, or the next section of the essay that I'll be addressing, which is kind of clarity of writing style. So that's what I mean by kind of signposting to the reader where they are and where they're going to be going next, because it then just gives your essay that kind of continuity and that narrative flow. So the next time you're planning an essay, don't forget that it's as important to think about how you intend to use and link up the information that you intend to present, as it is to think about what information you actually want to cover in your essay. A plan that consists both of content and of ideas about how you're going to use that content is going to be a lot more useful to you in producing a high quality essay than just the kind of inventory of things that you want to cover.